All right, coming back after the weekend, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Good morning, everyone. Today's Reddit rant is going to be a spicy one. First, a little nugget. Since my last job ended on Friday, today we're doing our rant from a Home Depot parking lot because I've got some catch up to do around the house before my next job starts. Into the Reddit rant, we have an article from Business Insider, and this is a juicy one. Financial disaster for millions of Americans could arise if Supreme Court strikes down Biden's student loan forgiveness. Elizabeth Warren details in a new report. Elizabeth Warren is a major advocate for student loan forgiveness. The idea basically saying that we have this huge burden of debt out there, true, that debt constrains the lives of so many people, also true, that there's no way under the law currently to escape from student loan debt because it's not bankruptable, also true. So the federal government needs to forgive the loans outstanding. False. Just my 2 cents. I do not agree with Elizabeth Warren on this particular issue. Anyway, let's look at this article in specific. Last year, President Joe Biden issued a student loan forgiveness, basically executive order, and said $20,000 per borrower, up to that, is going to be forgiven. Well, a bunch of people filed lawsuits and said, you don't get to do that. And so there was an injunction put in place, which is a fancy lawyer judge term for let's put a pause on that while we figure it out. And so no student loan forgiveness has occurred yet because of that injunction. And it's been preparing to wind its way through various courts, and now it's in the Supreme Court's docket. The Supreme Court is going to start hearing arguments, I believe, tomorrow, and they expect to put a ruling down on these lawsuits in the summer. That's typically the cycle for Supreme Court cases, if you're not familiar. So the day before oral arguments, Senator Warren issues a report, and frankly, it appears to be a report that's trying to advocate or push for one side. Totally fine, well within her realm as a senator to weigh in on this issue as persuasively as she can. More power to her. It's pretty interesting, though, that she basically went to 20 advocacy groups. These are people who have a vested interest in this issue and said, tell me how this will affect your people. Well, shockingly, she got a bunch of answers about how this striking down the loan forgiveness would be a terrible thing. Having been in extensive debt and currently being in extensive debt, I am sympathetic to the plight of a borrower who has so much debt outstanding that they feel like they are stuck in this burden forever. Thankfully, none of my debt is non-bankruptable, but I at least have that kind of break glass in case of emergency measure. People in student loan debt don't have that. Right away, my thought is, as an alternative to federal government loan forgiveness, amend the law and make student loan debt bankruptable. It's not a pleasant solution. It's not something that people would want to do. But if you're truly desperate, it gives you an out. And I think it would put a measure of caution into people who lend money for student loans to say, if this debt is bankruptable, if there's a chance of this blowing back on me, then maybe I'll be a little more careful who I pass these student loans out to. And we probably need to do a deep dive into the whole education system, student loan thing, whatever, on a live stream. Maybe we'll do that this afternoon in honor of this Reddit rant. But it's really outside the scope of just this particular article because it's a big, hairy deal. So, focusing more specifically on this article, there's a bunch of quotes and commentary citing this report Senator Warren filed. And totally fine. Again, we're presenting this quote, if the Supreme Court sides with the extremist judges, millions of Americans' monthly costs will rise significantly when student loan payments resume later this year. Setting aside the inflammatory language, again, this is a report written by advocacy groups. I do think it's interesting that they raised the issue that people's monthly costs will rise when student loan payments resume, which if you look at the implication of that, what they're actually saying is, hey, ever since COVID, the federal government has suspended the requirement of federally insured student loans from being paid, which means that there's a whole bunch of this borrower group that haven't been making any monthly payments for literally years at this point. Their debt has been out there, but they have not had the monthly impact on their budgets. They've had de facto relief for a couple of years now. And it looks like it's set, I think in June, to resume payments. They're saying, hey, listen, if people have to start paying on this debt again, then their monthly costs are going to go up. Yeah, that's how monthly payments work. Anyway, doesn't seem like news to me. Of course, there's a lot of sob story about how COVID-19 ruined everybody. There are 2 conservative-backed lawsuits that are both pertinent to this. I guess they're both going to be heard concurrently or simultaneously. There's some talk about inequity in the system, about how borrowers tend to come from poorer districts, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that I think is interesting is that we could really break down this issue on several different levels and have a productive conversation on several different levels. You have the individual responsibility of a person to set their own course in life. Each one of these people who engaged with student loans did so voluntarily. At some point in their life, they decided, as an adult, 18 and older, I'm going to take on this debt because I think it's a smart move. Maybe they were lied to. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were ignorant. Maybe they were manipulated. Maybe they had something crazy happen. For instance, take on 4 years of undergraduate debt, a year and a half of law school debt, and then have a stroke. And now your brain is more or less broken, and you're hampered in your ability to perform in the marketplace, and you can't pass the bar, and all of that debt you were planning to pay off with a lawyer's salary, you can no longer do that. That's a crazy circumstance, but I'm certain something like that has happened, or hit by a car or whatever, pick another emergency. So you didn't plan for this. Maybe you had a smart plan, but it went sideways on you and something happens. Life happens. That's how this works. We could have a conversation at that level. And I think that that is a very productive level of conversation, because if you want to unwind your life from this mess, the most effective level to do that is as an individual. There are many quotes from borrowers here where they basically say, I need this relief program because I have no other way out. In fact, there's a quote from a 64-year-old person basically saying, this weighs on me every day. I have no other way out. I need this relief program. If you're 64 years old and you are so shackled by student loan debt, that's awful, frankly. But there's another level, which is, okay, the federal government has created this monstrosity with federally insured student loans, thereby subsidizing the costs of education, which incentivizes higher education to charge more because they know the federal government is going to make sure they get paid eventually. So they know that their income is guaranteed. So charge more because they know that the upfront cost to the consumer is less. So charge more, inflate the costs. So there's a reason why higher education costs have gone up way faster than all the other inflation in society. And part of it is this government regulation, because as we talked about the other day, there's a risk to a world of no government regulation or too little government regulation, negative externalities. But there's equally risk to a world where you have government regulation because you create perverse incentives in the marketplace. The things that you do to try and mitigate negative externalities will cause ripple effects because it affects the decision making that people do in the marketplace. And it's going to create situations that are bad. So if the federal government made this mess, federal government probably has a role in cleaning it up. Even if I go with you to that point, though, we have to deal with the fact that the proposed solution that the Democrats are pushing through President Joe Biden's debt cancellation plan, that proposed solution is unconstitutional. If you believe the federal government has a legitimate voice in this, an action to take, that's fine, but play within the rules. I've already proposed one option: amend the law that makes student loans non-bankruptable. Allow desperate borrowers to file bankruptcy on their student loans, get out from under this mess, and move on with their lives. That comes at a personal cost, but each person can then freely choose whether or not they want to go through that personal cost. It gives a way out. And that would be constitutional, because that is Congress passing a law, amending an existing law. Works for me. Whereas the Constitution requires that Congress hold the power of the purse, specifically the House of Representatives, that Congress control spending decisions and budget decisions. We live in a world where we're wandering so far afield from the rule of law, from civil society, that we're we're dissolving the walls between the different branches of government. We're removing the checks and balances that have kept us safe for so long from government overreach. The fact of the matter is, this article is framed as the executive branch is proposing one thing. The judicial branch is going to weigh in on that and decide whether or not he's being appropriate. And there's no voice in all of this that says it's the legislative branch that's supposed to do that. I mean, if the government wants to shell out a couple $1 trillion on student loan forgiveness, that's a budgetary outlay, which means it should come from the body that holds the power of the purse. And yet there's very little acknowledgement in this left-slanted article of that very real objection. The idea is there could be many people in the Republican Party, in the federal government, who say we are sympathetic to the need for student loan forgiveness. We need to fix this issue, but we need to do it the right way. If you accept a federal government that has no checks on its power, you've accepted a king, and you're going to get what you want, and you're not going to like it. To their credit, that there is a quote in here that says, from a Republican member of Congress. It says, Congress is the only body with the authority to enact sweeping and fundamental changes of this nature, and it is ludicrous for President Biden to assume he can simply bypass the will of the American people. So it's an actual on-point quote that fairly represents the Republican side. Yay! It's 20 paragraphs down, but and it's immediately responded with, but Warren's report suggests that many Americans want this relief, and financial consequences could be severe without it. If a majority of Americans want this relief, if it really is that popular, then the members of Congress would want to do it, because it would increase their popularity with their base and make it more likely for them to be reelected. If they're not willing to push this through, is it really as popular as you're saying that it is? I think probably not. Oh, here it is. A 64-year-old person said, the thought of having the loan payments starting again in general and without cancellation terrifies me. It means I might have to take a second job or use my 401k retirement money to pay for the loans. I cannot plan for retirement. That's 64 years old. That's distressing. And I want to end with this. This is the final quote. And I think this exemplifies another issue that we have. Now, all eyes turn to the Supreme Court, which is expected to hand down rulings in the two cases before the end of its term, typically in late June or early July. What they're really saying is, we as a people are relying on the Supreme Court to solve this for us. If you're relying on the Supreme Court to legislate from the bench, you've got a problem. It seems to be part of the leftist playbook. I wouldn't even call it Democrat, let's call it leftist. The leftist playbook that says we need to get a Supreme Court that's tilted our way, and then we need to get the Supreme Court to make decisions that benefit us policy-wise, that enact our will generally over the American people, to accomplish things that we can't seem to do through the legislature. And then we need to protect those decisions as now settled law. Yes, I'm thinking about abortion. The most recent example of this is Roe versus Wade. The simple truth is, up till 1973, we had a legislative process that state by state set different guidelines on abortion. What was legal, what wasn't legal. That is federalism. That is the system that we live in. That means, as someone who's against abortion, that there were a lot of states where abortion was allowed, and I would object to that. But I don't live in those states, so I don't have a voice there. It was a process that could be adjusted over time. It's far easier as an interest group to affect your local state legislature and pressure them into making a change to a state law that you would like to see changed, for or against abortion. It's still it's a lower bar to clear. Instead, you freeze all of that. You displace all of that when you create a judicial ruling that says, basically by the fiat of a half a dozen people, this is now the law of the land, period, full stop. The only way you can change it is to come back to the same court that just said this and get them to say something different. That is not representative of the will of the people. That is not democratic in its process. The idea that the people who are advocating for a direct democracy, which we are not, also support a Supreme Court ruling on their pet issues that is very much not democratic, represents cognitive dissonance. That's another topic for a live stream, but cognitive dissonance is a prerequisite if you want to be a leftist these days. You have to be willing to hold incompatible positions in your head at the same time. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Otherwise, your brain... I don't see a way to support leftist ideological causes without also being willing and able to hold contradictory opinions in your head at the same time. Some people view that idea of being able to hold contradictory opinions in your head as a form of sophistication. And it's often people who are highly educated who claim the ability to do this. They actually hold it up as a strength, as a sign of intelligence, and as I said, sophistication. It's not. It's actually kind of a sign of mental illness. On the one hand, Business Insider actually quoted a Republican. Yay! On the other hand, it's clearly biased in favor of the debt cancellation program, which I can't support because I'm a supporter of the current Constitution as written. And for all the people who say, but the Constitution was written hundreds of years ago, my 2 cents is, yeah, it's been amended 20 some odd times. Go ahead, amend it. Make whatever changes you want to make. But if you're not able to change it, it means that you are in the minority, that your position is probably not good for the broad scope of the Republic, and that you should be kept in a corner, being noisy but ineffective. That's what the Constitution does. It sets broad boundaries and guidelines on what is and isn't acceptable behavior in our Republic. That's my Reddit rant for today. Some of these might run a little longer during this time where I'm between jobs. Some of them might be a little shorter. We're just gonna have to see how it goes. Also, I might toss in some bonus content if I get a little time, but first I gotta get some household catch up done. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Subscribe if you want to subscribe. I hate the shilling, but it's the business model. So have a wonderful day.